Hello everyone and anyone watching this video right now. If you're watching this, then you're more than likely an artist, like myself. You're also more likely an artist who invests themselves or is a part of the online art community, again, like I am. I have been an artist online for a good while now and have seen many situations involving certain art crimes and people being called out for them. It happens every other month or so when an artist gets called out for many different things that artists themselves are not particular fans of other artists doing. One of those things is tracing, and that is what I will be talking about today. Before I start, there is something I want to note. I am not talking about anyone in particular. I am not talking about any specific artist or any situation in particular. Truth be told, there are a ton of artists that get called out for tracing, or really any of the art crimes you will find online. This isn't specific to one person, and I don't want to make it seem like as if it is. It's also better for a video about general tracing to be talking about it in a general way. That way, the video can be used in context for any future situations that do involve tracing that takes about any sort of nuance into consideration, which is what I tried to do with just about any situation in particular, because remember, things are not black and white. Everything has a shade of gray and different color hues to it, so yay! While I say this, I also don't want to make it seem like as if I'm the reigning king of the art world and what I say goes when it comes to tracing. Down to the dungeon with you if you dare disagree. I am not making this video as if I know everything, because I don't. I am making this video as a way to educate others and as a comprehensive look into the action of tracing, taking all sides into consideration and all that. Alright guys, let's put on our detective hats, pull out our notepads, and blow on our bubble pipes as we look into the art crime of tracing. Before we talk about if tracing is even good to do, we need a definition for it, and what better way to find one than on Google. Tracing, by definition, is to copy a drawing, map, or design. In this case of art, it would be a drawing or design, by drawing over its lines on a superimposed piece of transparent paper. It is the act of copying lines of an art piece by whatever means you have, whether it's tracing paper on top of a light, or if it is just setting the original piece of work to low opacity in your digital art program. Hello, hi, Editing Toasty here. Just came here for an interjection because I forgot to mention something in my original script in regards to the definition of tracing. The definition states it is the act of copying lines from one piece to another. However, some people have it in their head that tracing is only applicable if it is 100% of the lines that are copied, which is not the case. In my opinion, it is if the majority of the lines match up from one piece to another. Then, most likely, it is traced. But I did want to make note of this because I feel like people forget that it doesn't have to be 100% of the lines that are copied, as if it's the only way to trace when it isn't. It's if the majority of the lines match up from one piece to another, then more likely it is traced. And you will see that as the video continues. So now back to your regularly scheduled video. Now that we know what tracing is, I am going to give a bit of a hot take. Technically not a hot take, it's more lukewarm nowadays, on tracing as an action. Tracing is not a bad thing to do. Before I have people coming down my throat for this, let me say right here that this is very dependent on certain things, namely how you do it and what you do with that piece you make as a result of tracing. It is kind of like lying. Lying itself is not a bad action if done in the correct way. For example, lying about taking a $20 bill from someone is bad. However, if you lied that you didn't live alone when you do to a stranger asking about your living situation, then yeah, maybe that's a good reason to lie. This is why you will find artists online getting called out for tracing, even though the act itself is gaining a bit more acceptance in the art community. It is because those artists in particular have not used the act in a correct way. Let's now dive into the do's and don'ts of tracing. Tracing to get a specific style for your own artwork. This was a reason for tracing that I honestly didn't think about until recently when I watched Melly Malware's video on her tracing the Gravity Falls art style for her own artwork. If you are tracing in order to have a specific style for your own artwork, to use it to learn from it and to be able to replicate it in a way yourself, then yeah, I think that is a perfectly valid reason as to why you would do it. Most of us as artists were more than likely inspired to draw or animate due to someone else's artwork and how it impacted us. A part of the reason as to why it may have done so is because of the art style and wanting to replicate it ourselves. I, for example, loved the art style of Avatar: The Last Airbender. I spoke about it in a previous video about my art inspirations, but I loved the art style Avatar: The Last Airbender used for their show, and I wanted to use it for myself. Granted, I never traced in order to do so, but I did find similar pieces of media with the same or similar art style that I could use as references to try to draw it by hand and from just looking at it. Though there are people that will trace over scenes and frames from a piece of media in order to get a style like it for their own art, which again, I think is perfectly fine. There are, however, nuances to this method, which I will discuss more when we get into the don'ts section of the video. Just put a little asterisk in your head about it. Another thing I want to mention is that this is a common tactic used by many animators who work on cartoons. Cartoons are not a one-man show most of the time, especially not by big animation companies. They have many animators that work on shows and movies. In order for those animators to draw in the same style as the others, so the scenes don't look different when different people work on them, they will trace over the characters and other things so that they can learn to draw in that style for themselves, just so the show or movie looks consistent throughout. Tracing is a good tool to use for this reason in specific, and it just makes sense to utilize it to learn in this way. There are other ways that you can learn from tracing, so let's continue to the other do's I have in this list. Tracing to better your anatomy. This is another point brought up as to why tracing can be a good learning tool for new artists, or just artists in general. Using tracing to better your anatomy is a good thing, as long as you are tracing from good sources. If you want to improve your anatomy, it's better to trace from photos rather than art pieces. That way you can get more accuracy with where the joints and certain parts go. Then, once you have gotten it to a point you like, you can stylize it in a way that you want. Whether you want to go more cartoonish, anime or manga-like, or comic style, or just realistic. Just depends on what you want for your own art style. This method also helps if you have a part of your drawing that you are currently stuck on. For example, I hate drawing hands. I'm pretty sure every artist and their mother will tell you a similar thing. However, a thing I do every so often when I am stuck on a hand pose is I will take a photo of my own hand in that same pose so I can use it to trace over or use it as a reference, just so I have a better way to visualize what I want to draw. I will do this with general poses too, however you will catch me doing this with hands more often than not. There are also nuances to this as well, again, asterisk in your head about it, but in general I do not mind it if you are using tracing as a way to better your anatomy. It is perfectly fine to do so, and in fact a smart way of going about bettering your artwork. Now that we've talked about the things that you should do when tracing, let's get into what you shouldn't be doing when tracing. Tracing without credit. This is one of those nuances I told you to put an asterisk in your head about. Before we really get into the meat of things of what you shouldn't do when tracing, I need this stated about the valid reasons to trace. Those two reasons I mentioned previously are only okay if you credit the original artist or media source you traced from, as well as letting everyone know that it is a traced piece of art to learn to better your own art style. If you are, for example, tracing a certain artist's work to get a specific art style, like if you traced from Death Note Gravity Falls or My Hero Academia, then you need to let everyone know that you are tracing from those sources if you post your artwork online. Same goes for if you are tracing to improve your anatomy. Unless using a photo made by yourself, like taking a photo of your own hand, you need to credit whatever source you use to trace to better your anatomy. It is not only respectful to the artists or sources you do trace from, but it is also respectful to anyone who views your artwork. Reason why is because if you do not credit where you traced from, then it will be seen as lying of omission. You are tricking people into thinking the artwork you draw is made by your own hand and are omitting the fact that you traced from another artist. People have a general understanding that if an artist says they made a piece, then they made that piece. Unless told otherwise or pointed out, no one is going to know, especially if you are tracing from smaller artists. I am not then trying to say that it is okay to trace from a big show like The Simpsons without credit. That is not my point at all. What I am saying is that people normally have a level of trust that an artist had made a piece, and it will be completely severed if you choose to omit the truth and lie about it by not crediting. This is a point that touches on any sort of tracing. Tracing is fine, unless you are not crediting the artist. If you are not doing that, then you are stealing from other artists and claiming it as your own. You didn't get away with plagiarism in your 8th grade English class, so why do you think you can get away with stealing an art piece to claim as your own here? Does not make sense at all. Selling your traced pieces. Not crediting traced works and selling traced pieces are what I think the biggest and most often seen claims used when artists get called out for tracing. A lot of the time, they go hand in hand too. Not everyone who doesn't credit their pieces are selling them, but the majority of the time, if they are selling those traced pieces, then they are also not crediting the original artist doing so. An issue with not crediting the original artist of your traced piece is that you are taking the attention away from those artists with your traced piece if you do not say where the original comes from. The same issue persists here, except you are also making money off stealing from artists. Sometimes you might also be taking away commission opportunities from the original artist too. Stealing from artists is one thing, but making money off stealing from the hard work of other artists is very, very selfish and greedy. These artists will sell these pieces off online or sometimes at conventions to make money off of these people who do not know these pieces are traced, believing fully they were made by the person selling them, which is untrue. They don't use tracing as a way to learn. They use it as a quick way to make money from the skill of another artist who also just wants to make a living from their own pieces. There are two other things you should not do when tracing pieces that kind of go hand in hand with this point of not selling them. The first is entering contests with traced artwork. There are people that will submit traced pieces into contests within the fandom they are a part of in order to gain attention or even money prizes from winning it, which is why this applies to selling them, because those people are monetarily gaining from stealing from other artists. Doing this is stealing the spotlight from a different artist who worked hard on their submission, who also really would have loved to win the competition, as well as being much more deserving of the win than the tracer is. Another thing you should not do that coincides with selling traced pieces is tracing to pretend to be someone else. Normally, if someone is trying to pretend to be someone else, they will just steal the pieces flat out from the original poster's account and post it on their own fake account. However, there are also people who will actively trace the original artist's work to pretend to be them online for attention, but also for money if they try to sell those traced pieces using the original artist's name. Some may also try to ruin the artist's name by pretending to be them online. This happens online as is, but it also happens for artists if someone pretends to be the original artist They may say some really problematic things to try to ruin the reputation of the artist, but they may also draw things in that person's style that are also problematic, which can also ruin the name of the artist who did nothing wrong. Overall, selling traced pieces of others' work is making money from stealing from actual artists, trying to make their name or make a living, or hell, just doing it as a hobby. If you are doing this, selling your traced pieces, entering contests with traced work, or tracing to pretend to be a bigger name, then you need to cease that before you get into way bigger trouble. I say that because there are artists that will take legal action over selling traced pieces of their own work, which I cannot blame them for, since the tracer is essentially making money from pieces they do not own. This doesn't happen much with smaller artists who don't have the money, but big companies like Disney will do those things. So unless you want to dance with the big company in a legal case that you will more than likely not have the money for to win, then it's best to refrain from tracing to sell them for monetary gain. Tracing over AI images. This idea has started to pop up more recently with the use of AI, and especially AI art. Obviously, using AI to make artwork and claim it as your own is a no-go, and something very frowned upon in the art community. However, there are also other things people have been doing with AI art. First is reposting the original AI post and image and redrawing it by hand. Artists have come forward and have told others to not do this because it means more people will make more AI images and art, which is something we do not want. Redrawing it and posting it along with the original AI post will only bring more attention to the people making those AI images, and those people love attention. I understand that artists that do this are trying to get back at AI bros for making those images in the first place, but in doing so, it will cause the opposite effect to take place. Another thing people think is okay to do is to trace from those AI images to either learn from them to make money or, again, as a gotcha against people who make AI images. Now, I do agree that using AI as a tool in general is not a bad thing, and using it as a way to learn from can be beneficial at points. However, using AI to learn to draw better will not be beneficial in the long run. AI is still not perfect. As much as it has come a long way, it is not a perfect tool. I have seen a multitude of images made by AI that have wrong perspective, muddied lines, incorrect anatomy, and other issues that are very apparent to other artists. This is why AI is not a good way to learn to draw from, because it itself is not a perfect source. AI also still uses non-participating or unwilling artists' work to fuel its database to give out its product. It actively steals from those artists who do not want their work used in that fashion. So even if you do not trace from an actual artist and not credit, but instead use AI to trace from, you are still stealing from artists. Which is also why making money from tracing AI art is also not good. It still steals from artists, and if you sell those pieces, you will still be making money from stolen art. I also understand if you want to get back at AI bros, and by doing so, you trace the work to then steal it back in a sense. However, the problems from before still persist here, that you would just be making money from stolen art from actual artists used to make the AI image, as well as it just not being a good source to trace from, which will then end up with a lackluster result. AI has no place in the art community, and it should stay out of the art communities that were started by human beings years ago. Let's do our best to not support those people who support AI in our art spaces. Tracing only one part of a piece or a pose. This point sounds weird, but let me explain it a little more. If you are, for example, tracing the arms of one piece and you are using them on your own and they are the center point of your piece, then it is still tracing and you need to credit the artist of the original piece. It doesn't matter if you are tracing the arm pose to learn or because you were stuck on it or anything. If you are tracing from another piece of art or from a photo you do not own, then you need to credit regardless. Now on to the second part of my point. I very much understand that pose theft is not a thing. I am not trying to imply it does exist with this point. However, at the same time, you cannot trace a pose and then when an artist calls you out for tracing their work, you then claim pose theft does not exist. You still traced a pose that you did not draw. That is the point. They are not making the point they own the pose. They are making the point that they own the art piece that uses the pose that you did trace from. Now, there are other ways you can draw a pose you are stuck on. For example, you can use a multitude of pose makers online. I use one myself and use it as a base to draw from. If you were to do that, then there would be no issue. You can also draw in the basic guidelines of a pose and use that in your own piece. That itself is not tracing. It is learning from the original piece and using it as a reference base to draw your own piece of art. If you prefer not to do that, then you can just easily use the original artwork as a reference to draw your own. Use the artwork to try to learn from your own eyes in order to draw it yourself. That is not a bad thing at all. Using references to draw a specific pose is not a bad thing. I do not understand why I have seen so many more people saying using references is bad, which is crazy given one of the first tips an artist will give to younger ones is to use references. That drawing from memory is not a good idea, and it's way more beneficial to have images on hand to reference from when you are drawing poses, characters, backgrounds, or anything. You end up getting a way better product when you are using references. What I'm saying in this point is that there are better ways to get a pose you want that isn't from tracing a piece of art from another artist. Hello, hi, Editing Toasty here, back again with another little editor's note. Just to say that copying is not the same as tracing. Someone drawing the same pose is not inherently tracing, and it is not a bad thing. There's no such thing as pose theft. You can draw the same pose as another artist. I plan to get more in-depth with that in a later video. But just to clear the air here, since it is being mentioned that you can draw the same pose as someone, and it doesn't inherently mean that it is tracing. Also, if someone draws the same pose as another person, it is also possible that the lines will match up in some regard, like body placement and in certain places like arms, waist, other things. That is just because it is the same pose, and depending on things like clothes worn and body type, it is possible some of those lines will match up. The difference is if the majority of those lines match up or not. If they do, then it can fall under scrutiny. If not, then most likely it is not a traced piece and it is just a drawing done in the same pose. In the case of if the majority of the lines do match up, you do have to look for a pattern. That is the thing with tracing, is if there's a pattern of this behavior. If there's a pattern of it, then it's easier to see if it is traced or not. That is what I also wanted to clarify, is if there is a pattern of this behavior, because if there's a pattern, then yeah, more than likely they are tracing. But I did want to clarify this just to, as a little editor's note. Okay, bye. These are all the points on my do's and don'ts when tracing. I want to make my stance clear. Tracing is fine itself to do, as long as you are doing it for the right reason and in the right way. Nowadays, artists have been way more accepting of using tracing as a learning tool, which is great. It means younger artists will get demonized less for trying to better their skill. If that happens, then possibly we, as artists online, can even focus our attention on the things that actually matter and are actually hurting the art community instead of attacking younger or more inexperienced artists from using tools at their disposal to learn from. Probably not, but a man can dream. Hopefully you have also learned something as you have listened to or watched this video. I am very positive I missed a couple things when talking about this, so if I did, please let me know in the comments. Maybe we all can have a civil discussion on the do's and don'ts of tracing so that this video can be used as a beneficial piece on the topic in general. That is what I really wanted this video to be, in all honesty. To possibly help others who do not know very much about this, while also getting my own thoughts out there. I have another video in a similar vein to this that I will try to work on and post as well at some point, whenever that may be. Until then, and until the next time I post, I will see you all next time. Bye.